I am Dr. Philip McMillan. Thank you again for joining me on a very important presentation or discussion with someone who has lived through a period of time of censorship and governmental over control. Now, this was in a communist country. And what struck me when I had spoken to her personally was that she saw similar patterns with regards to our current situation around COVID 19. I found that fascinating. And as part of that exploration as to how we are where we are today, I like to talk to people who have seen things that we may take for granted. So it's tremendous honor for me to introduce to you Olga, who has come and she's sharing her story. She's now in Canada, but I want to go through Olga's history and then we'll come to what she noticed with regards to COVID 19. So let's just start off with some basic stuff. Olga, tell us a little bit about you and where you are from.
It's an honor for me to be here, Philip. Thank you for the invitation. I was born in Russia, and I believe the time when it was a communist country. Communist in a way that government controls everything. How much you put it on your table, where you live, what education you get. And it's tough to explain to anyone who lives in a free world right now because it's a free country. I live in Canada. I'm very lucky. It's a beautiful country. But you cannot, you have that background, okay? You remember everything from your childhood, from you remember your friends, you remember your family, you remember your food, your language, your habits. But to be honest, I have never been back for like 26 years now. Never, even for one day.
So tell us a little bit about then so where did you grow up generally? In what region of communist Russia? And, what was it like as a child in that period of time?
Philip, it's tough to explain because my mother, my grandmother were very hardworking people. My mother had engineering degree. My grandma worked since she was 12 years old. My mother had 42 years of experience. Very hardworking family. But unfortunately, when I was a little girl, I realized that what you see on TV and what's going on in real life, it's sky and land. It does not matter how hard you work. Your life is very limited. You cannot choose lots of things. And the horrible things is, for me as a child, that whatever you see on TV, it's not what you see in real life. Everyone had access to 3 channels. Every big city had access to 3 channels. And all of them were controlled by the government. I was born in a small city somewhere in 1 hour flight from capital. 650,000 people. I would not say it's a remote area. It's a big industrial city, very well known. But in the same time, every time people were believing in government in general, and they were following the rules. You cannot speak out outside of your kitchen. I still remember that my grandma, she was the most brilliant woman I met in my life, but she never, ever talked about her past. I even didn't know that I had an aunt who died during the Second World War. I just realized later when I started to be more, let's say, mature, I realized that life of the people were so hard that they didn't want to talk about that at all.
Wow. And so you growing up in that environment, you then made a decision that you are going to leave communist Russia. Uh, what made you do that and where did you go?
I I made a decision when I was 16, 17 years old, and I didn't tell anyone. I just, I like to read, I like to meet people, I like to talk to them. And I just realized that it's not a free country. I have no idea why people decide to move. Immigration is a very tough subject. It's a very tough to make a move. And I don't know why other people are going from one place to another, from one country to another. But for me, I made a decision when I was so young just to live in a free world.
Mm.
Just, I never wanted to have a big house, let's say, or I never even dreamed to travel. My teacher, my brilliant teacher of geography, when she was explaining us different countries, she told me, okay, look at the map. It's beautiful Africa, it's beautiful America. Well, of course, we are not going there ever, but at least you know it exists. And I still
Mm.
remember she named all her three kids very exotic names from Africa. It was fascinating to me that, oh my God, look at that. Something outside of this wall exists.
Yes.
But you grow up with the feeling that you will never be there.
Now, listen, I think that what I want to make sure that the audience understands is that I am going to be connecting that experience of restriction that you had when you were younger to something that you noticed at the beginning of the pandemic. Before we go into it, I just want you to tell me when you first sensed something very similar to what you experienced as a child. When did that occur?
I realized that something is going wrong in March 2020 when big announcement was made for us to stay home. And it's a medical disaster, right? So the first things I want to know what doctors would say. I didn't have much trust in our politicians. Unfortunately, I never met a decent one in my life in person. But I met lots of great doctors in my life. Like on a personal level, I was thinking, oh my God, look at that. What's going on? Let me ask doctors what would be their advice. How should they behave? And I just look at internet. I talk to my friends, and I realize again that censorship is going on. I could not find even one doctor on internet who would give me personal advice other than mainstream media. And in mainstream media, it was the same basic rules. But I wanted to dig a little bit deeper. I wanted to know a little bit more because everybody has personal health issues. And certainly you would like to find a good doctor. But right away, I realized that it's a stream media narrative. That's it. You you cannot find anyone who would speak outside of the box, who would be willing even to talk about that. And
So I just want to pause you there. You picked up on that immediately in
immediately,
March 2020
immediately,
that there was something that was not right. What did that feel like for you? What was going through your head?
I was very scared and I was afraid. Um, when I complete my search, and I mean 3, 4, 5, 6 hours per day, I realize that I'm afraid of the this government rules more than I'm afraid of the virus. Because I remember myself being 16, 17 years old when we didn't have any information. Only information we get, it's only from two or three main channels. And in certain day, in certain time, the same people would tell you something what when you go outside or when you go to talk to your neighbors, it's a different. I picked up it right away because for 26 years, I live in a free world, in a free country. And I would expect different opinions. I would expect conversation. I would expect round table, let's say. I would expect people to say, oh, let's think about that. Let's think about that. Especially doctors. I wanted panel of doctors, like physicians, people who help patients on a daily basis to talk. And only what I saw very limited, very restricted, very mainstream approach of anyone who would allow to speak on a main screen.
So that in itself, because I'm reflecting on what I was thinking, and at that time, I wouldn't have thought anything out of the ordinary, because as I said, this is why I thought your experience was so valuable, because you immediately picked up on something that I don't think the majority of the population in the free world could see, because it has never happened before. How, I mean, and now that you're saying it, how could it have been so well organized in March 2020? Where, yes, where was the counter discussion?
Okay, Philip, when you grow up in a society, when you are controlled by just one party, and I mean Communist Party, when you are not supposed to think or ask questions, you are not supposed to even, you allowed to think only certain way. No one will support you if you decide to ask questions, because everybody would afraid that, oh, my teacher can say something against me, my principal can say something against me, my coworkers, my students, my friends, family members can be against you if you even question, even if you think to question what is going on a mainstream media. So just because 26 years it's big part of my life, I get used to live in a beautiful free world. And free, it means free. You're free to choose everything, your religion, your leaders, your friends, your hairstyle. Okay, you're free to express yourself. You're free to move from one city to another. You're free to work. You're free to do whatever you want. Right away, in March 2020, it took me maybe couple of days when I realized that leader of my country is staying right in front of us, telling us that it's a medical issue, medical disaster. And in the same time, Philip, maybe a little bit personal, and can I tell you that? I was surprised that the leader of this country, a man in his 40s, worked from home, and he was giving us speeches, and he was giving an update of a comfort of his backyard or front yard of his house, when thousands, if not millions of people, essential workers, had to go and work. I saw people in his 60s, in his 70s, doctors, nurses, bus drivers, policemen, firefighters. They work. They were afraid, but they went to work. They were essential. What struck me right away, that a leader of this beautiful country, work from home.
Mm.
I could not trust him after that. I would
Wow.
expect a different approach from a person whom we would call leader.
Wow. That's very insightful. And this is what I'm saying is that you can only see those things because you have experienced it and it was ingrained in you. So that as soon as any kind of pattern even looks like it, you recognize it immediately. So when you think about that, I mean, the world went into lockdown. There was clearly a lot of censorship of any opinion outside of that. But certainly it must have taken a different step. Could you have imagined that your country could have reached the mandating of a medical intervention? Could you have imagined that early on? Or was that surprising?
It was a big surprise, very big surprise. That's why it's, I would expect doctors, at least if you decide to do lockdowns, I would expect free conversation. I would expect a round table with lots of doctors with different opinions. I would expect lockdowns, it's tough to imagine to happen in a free world because basically people who live in a social communist country, they live in lockdowns all their lives.
Mm,
It's not lockdown that you sit in your house, but it's your mental lockdown.
wow.
It's lockdown what my grandma, my mother, my relatives experience all their lives. It's a mental lockdown, what would never, ever, ever disappear from your mind. And now when it's a physical lockdown, you would expect opinions. Why? No, that was just a rule. You have to follow, and everybody did.
There's something you touched on there that I really wanted to get into, which is the mental lockdown. Do you think the West is still currently almost in that still same mindset of a mental lockdown where they they will only respond to instructions? Is that still possible?
It's 100% possible. Fear is contagious, okay? And I do understand that lots of people were afraid because what they saw, for the first 2, 3, 6 months, that was, I'm sorry, Philip, I would call it propaganda. What I experienced all my life as a child. When you cannot question decisions, when you cannot ask questions, when you cannot discuss what's going on, it's not a science. Okay? We get used to. And lots of people love it. Lots of people believe in that. Lots of people saw the way out of pandemic by seeing a very strict rules, because for some it was horrible experience. Even I can understand people who wanted very strict guidelines for everyone because fear was enormous. I don't know about other countries, but here in Canada, it was constantly on a mainstream media. For beginning, I could not find any other information. So for first 6 months, mainly it was TV information from a mainstream. And It was a horrible experience. I could not find any positive, I could not find even smile on people's face. I I could not, when it's a disaster. And I remember my country survived in the Second World War. We were told 27 million people died. Every family lost someone. And years later, we still remember those people. It's enormous tragedy. And we talk about this tragedy on a daily basis. That's part of the culture. You cannot avoid it. But in the same time, Philip, we had great books who describe war with humor. We had great stories. We had great movies. We had great memories. But when lockdown happened and it's mainstream media and we have to, well, let's use the word combat that disaster, I could not find the leaders. I could not find a brave man on a mainstream media. I saw lots of examples on website, on YouTube's with private conversation, but I could not find, I could not see even a glance of hope, let's say. Something positive, something what leader will do. You know, just light on the end of the channel, a smile from a nurse, a smile from a doctor who would say, we found it will be, it's temporary. We will go through that. You know, something would drive people to be positive, not to be afraid on a daily basis.
No, those are powerful observations. And I think one of the reasons why I wanted to talk to you, Olga, is that it seems as though we are not beyond that yet. And if the political class has that kind of influence and have tasted the power of it, they will never want to let it go, will they?
You're absolutely right. You're absolutely right, Philip. That's something what government once experienced. It's nice to hold people in that stage when they can manipulate, when they can control them, when they can say and people will listen. It's very sad for me, Philip, to see right now people who driving in a car with a mask on, just a one driver, just a nice car, and this person is wearing N95 mask. It was very difficult for me to see an old lady in a park by herself. No one is around her, and she's wearing a mask. She's very afraid. And if anyone just near her, she's like turning her head and she's afraid that somebody would approach her. And I saw people who were afraid that other people were touching their dogs. You know, that's mental stage. Unfortunately, my stay forever, because the moment you cross this line, the moment you realize that you're in danger, you follow the rules. And it might be medical danger, or it might be danger from a government who might be just be interested in your behavior, as we all felt as a, when you're 16, 17, you're not afraid of anything. You know everything in your life. Now every step is a challenge, but when you're young, you just explore everything, right? And every time, people around you tell you, no, be careful, don't say that, you cannot do that, please think about that. No, we are your friends, like, please do it without us, or never mention our names, never mention our last names. That stays in you for the rest of your life.
That's powerful stuff. I know what I'm interested then. I really want to dig into your thinking then. Where the pandemic is now, it's been declared over by the World Health Organization. Um, One of the big concerns from a scientific point of view is that it's concerning to me that excess deaths are rising, and there doesn't seem to be an interest in trying to understand the mechanism and whether or not this is a trend that is going to go up, is going to come down, and even if it was going up, could we mitigate it? Now, I want to take you back to what you experienced as a child. What would have been the playbook in a communist environment if there were risks associated with what the government did? What would they do?
They will try to forget about that. It's never happened. It does not exist. Everything was done perfectly. Just remember that yes, unfortunately, something happened in the past, but we've done everything right. And now we would like to move forward. And we will think about our heroes. We would remember name of you. And let's not to talk about that ever. And I'm talking about Chernobyl here. I'm talking my experience when I was 16 years old, when Chernobyl in 1986 happened. And it's well known now that it's a man-made tragedy. Yes, it's happened. And it was horrible experience for anyone in a country, but especially for people who live close to that region. 30-kilometer zone was very well known. Government spent money, time to move people out of 30 kilometers. But again, lots of people in Ukraine at that time, even right now, asking a question, why it's only 30 kilometers? What is going on with people in 35, 33, 50? I could not find any information. Of course, back then we didn't have a phone, we didn't have internet, and I used to live very, very far. But every summer, I traveled to Ukraine for 3 months, June, July, August, to meet my grandma. And again, Philip, it's impossible to explain that when you see on TV, it's not what you see in real life. I can give you a little example. And what 16, 17 years old girl can understand. I think a lot. Once I was staying in a line to get some berries. And summertime, beautiful berries, young men selling berries. And line maybe 12, 15 people. Most of them women. And it was a question, and I'm in a beautiful, beautiful Ukrainian city, quite far from tragedy when it happened, quite far from 30-kilometer zone. And one lady was asking this young man very simple question, where are you coming from? Where is your berries from? And the man didn't answer the question. He just smiled. Philip, half of the line decided not to buy these berries. Half of the line realized that why would this young man, he just smiled. Why would he just want to answer a very simple question, where he's coming from, where is this berries from? And just because I was originally from very far, at that time I was living thousand kilometers away. And just for summertime, I came to see my grandma. But definitely I sense that people know something more than I know. So basically, later on, we realized that more than 30 kilometers were contaminated. And government didn't tell everything to people. And just because information was not available for lots of people, and lots of people were very concerned about their health and health of their kids, they stopped trust even each other. They stopped believing each other. And I remember very sad, for me, it's still very sad moment when lots of young men, I believe it was more than, eventually over the years, more than 400,000 people were deployed to make sure that Chernobyl will never happen again and make sure that this part of the world is safe for rest of the country and the world. I still remember when I was very young girl and I was staying with my friend, and two young men approached us just to introduce themselves, but they were in specific uniforms. And my friend was afraid that they came from Chernobyl area, from contaminated area. And she was afraid and she didn't want to talk to those people. And I felt it's so unfair. It's so unfair not to give those two people a chance to speak, and to fear actually very contagious.
And I sometimes wonder if we are at a stage now where the conversation about potential vaccine harms, which cannot seem to occur on mainstream media, but yet people are seeing people dying, and quietly they are making decisions about themselves and their family, and they are afraid. Is that a fair comparison?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Because when you live through that, you cannot forget about that. I would say yes. I would say, Philip, yes, because everybody deal with fear differently. For some people, it's a challenge. For some people, it's just a way of life. For some people, it's a horrible experience and they try to forget about that. And it's understandable, everybody will react differently. But yes, I would agree with that.
And so, as we close this out, Olga, you're in the free world now. You have seen and you almost instinctively see where it can go. What is your message? And this is the bit that I think is important. What is your message to people in the free world that would help them to recognize and protect against a transition where their freedom is lost?
It has to be free world. It has to be free speech for sure. Everybody, everyone is entitled to talk, is entitled to their opinion, and it should not be any censorship. People are not supposed to try to find information. They are not supposed to be afraid to speak, especially doctors. My understanding is that government was very, very exceptionally disrespectful for people who were on who were essential basically first year and a half before vaccination was available, who work without vaccination, who work without fear. And unfortunately, what I realized, that eventually we became very disrespectful to them, because now they know something. Nurses, doctors, frontline workers, and they're not allowed to speak. That's what make me feel that is absolutely unacceptable in a free society. We are not supposed to have censorship for people who would like to talk, who have something to say, And we certainly have to give them rights to talk. We don't have to be afraid. Scientists are not supposed to be afraid to ask questions. That's exceptionally important, because otherwise people will have very, very deep inside, this fear will continue forever. They will never have closure to this pandemic. And unfortunately, when it happens again, it might happen. If it happened, it might happen again. And if we have never done any mistakes, I don't think so, but government has to accept different opinions at that point, and we have to start talking right now and make a better understanding what happened and how to avoid very difficult decision when it lockdowns. It's again, it's not a physical lockdowns, it's a mental lockdowns right now.
Yes.
People already understand that mental lockdowns can last long life.
Yes, I think that is the main point, Olga, is that this is what I was trying to capture from you. And it stunned me when I first heard it, that in effect, if you take that freedom for granted, the reality is that you could lose it. If you give your ability to think and choose to others, then they will choose for you. And that's the reality of what seems to happen historically. I think that the valuable lesson that I've learned from you, Olga, is that when you see anything that drifts in that direction, it has to be challenged. Because if it isn't, the outcomes could be a disaster for all of us.
Yes, and I encourage everyone to speak up. And I still don't understand why people are afraid. We live in a free society. We live in a free world. Fear are not supposed to be your main concern in a free world.
Thank you very much, Olga. Really appreciate you speaking up. Thank you.
Thank you, Philip. Bye bye.
Bye-bye.